Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. So a very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator podcast. Carl and I are delighted to be joined by Joe Jacobi, a former Olympian, a gold medalist no less, and we're going to be talking to him about quite a diverse story of transition. There's a multiple range of touch points in this, which I think is going to be fascinating to explore, Joe. So first and foremost, a very warm welcome, and thank you very much for spending your time with us.
It's great to be here and excited to talk about transition. I love the way you guys are approaching it. So let's dig in.
Thanks very much, Joe. Well, obviously, as you say, we're going to talk very much about transition, but with every guest, we love the frame setting at the beginning of the conversation just to take you back into that elite sporting world and ask you that question of what are the proudest memories? I mean, I can sense there will be one or two that will come to the fore, but if you had to pick one or two of those memories from your sporting career, and tell us a bit about the discipline. I neglected to mention that in the intro. So tell us a little bit about what you were competing in the Olympics and pull out a couple of memories that bring you that sense of pride for us.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I was a whitewater canoe slalom athlete. And so, a sport I still get to do and enjoy today at age 55. I started paddling when I learned to paddle when I was 8. I guess I started to like it about the time I was 10. And, one of the things that's very unique about our sport, and I think very relative to the conversation today, guys, is that when you are navigating a whitewater river and the rapids of a river, it's not like being on a putting green where you can read a stable surface. Like the surface is always moving, it's always changing. You're always in transition. And in fact, in whitewater canoeing, when things are not going well, you can't just call time out. I don't like the way things are shaping up here. You've got to adjust from plan A to plan B to plan C to plan D seamlessly without stopping. So the whole nature of doing well in the sport of whitewater canoeing was the basis of transitioning yourself well over and over and over again throughout a 2-minute run down the river rapids. And then you asked me about sort of, happiest memories. I mean, of course, winning a gold medal at the 1992 Olympics here in La Seu d'Urgell in the Spanish state of Catalonia, where I live now. I live right next to the Olympic venue. But what's interesting, and James, you mentioned, you have a coaching practice as well. I think one of the things that makes me the happiest about when I'm working with coaching clients is that someone will hit their target, a client will hit their target like, oh, our nonprofit got its first 8-figure donation. And then there'll be a pause. And that person will say, but here's the best part. As if getting the 8-figure donation was not the best part, and then they'll actually tell something that they learned, something that they grew upon that journey. And so when you actually ask me about winning the Olympics, I think it's very much the same thing. I think that winning the Olympics and having a gold medal and standing on the podium, that was great. That was fine. But I think the really best part, was, I paddled in a doubles canoe with a partner we were really, really different than each other.
Okay.
Wouldn't say like 180 degrees different, but about 179.
Right.
I truly believe, like, had we been like 175 degrees different, like, I don't think we would have won the Olympic Games. And so paddling with someone who's so different than you, I think that on one hand, like, it gives you a greater range of perspective of how you see the world as a team. But on the other hand, like, it can create a lot of friction, a lot of tension. It can lead to a lot of disagreements, arguing, fighting, and figuring out how to work through that to kind of bring out the best in everyone. That's the best part. That's the happiest part for me.
No, I love that. It's going to be an interesting chat, this, Joe. I can sense it. So I'm going to come back to that in terms of, I want to touch on transferable skills a little bit later. And you've highlighted the learning journey, probably no surprises with what you're now doing. But before we get to that, obviously you're a very humble guy. You can see that you've sort of brushed quickly through being a gold medalist. I know it was the first ever US gold medal in sort of whitewater competition, so phenomenal achievement. What intrigues us is that you had a transition. Obviously, there's a transition post the Barcelona Olympics. I want to just explore a little bit about what did you do once you sort of put the paddle on the wall and say, okay, I'm stopping. And then there's almost a second transition story, which is quite unique. We've not had this before with our guests, where obviously you came back into that Olympic cycle, represented the US at Athens. And then, of course, there'll be the third transition where you then come out of that environment again into the present day. So, this is what we said in the intro about these multiple touch points of transition for you. So, could you just give us a little bit of a flavor of what happened post Barcelona? We're always interested into what do people do when they first step out of sport? And then the second question is probably what took you back in. So there'd be the interesting reflections we'd love to hear from you.
So, James, I hadn't made a firm decision not, to hang it up after 1992. What I was sure of after winning the Olympics was that whitewater canoeing, at least in the United States, this is not a sport where kids go to their PE teachers and check out canoes and kayaks during recess. Like if you want to paddle, you have to have parents that can get you to the river, that have the resources to buy the equipment and get you to a club and get involved. And so I sort of saw winning the Olympics as an opportunity to share the story of our sport. And I focused on that for a while. And one of the really, I write about this in my book, Slalom, where I was on the bus going to the closing ceremonies in Barcelona. And our coach asked me, he said, well, what's next? What are you going to do now? And I said, well, I've got a couple of speaking gigs lined up for when I get home. And Bill Endicott, the legendary coach of our sport, he looked at me and he said, great. Would you like some advice? I said, of course. And he said, well, I coached Norm Bellingham, who won a gold medal 4 years earlier at the 1988 Olympics. And I'll tell you what I told him is that you can go back to the United States with your gold medal and your team uniform. You can stand on a podium and speak for a few weeks. And no matter what you say, you can just blubber out gibberish for 30 minutes and people will think that's pretty good. But there's going to come a time a few weeks after the Olympics and the fade wears off where people are going to say, Joe, that's great. You won the Olympics, but how does that help me? How does your story help me? And so then Bill turned to me and he leaned in and he said, if you can figure out how this gold medal helps other people, you'll tell the story as long as you want to tell the story. And, all these years later, I mean, it's 33 years later, I'm still telling the story, not because I love the story, but because I see the story helping people. So I was so lucky to learn that skill and think about that skill of taking this very obscure, ambiguous sport, whitewater canoeing, and help it mean something to people and make it relevant to people. So that was my real first transition, was kind of thinking about reframing the story in a way that would be helpful to people. Like, where does paddling a river, kind of meet people in their life of, just trying to do a little bit better, make ends meet, find fulfillment at work, find fulfillment in their relationships, raising children. That was kind of what the transition step one looked like for me.
I love it, and I think everybody will be listening. They'll be going and checking out Slalom. So now we know that's your book. That's something for people to look at. And what great advice! And it lines up with one of the things we say repeatedly, probably on a daily basis, is where can you learn? Where can you find mentors? And that, albeit seemingly very brief piece of advice, probably completely changed the course of your life in terms of giving you that direction and that purpose. So, Joe, obviously, we're talking a little bit about post 92, but something obviously started to develop in your thought process and your thinking, because it wasn't the end of the Olympic journey. And as we said in the intro, you returned for Athens in 2004. So, talk to us a little bit about what brought you back into Olympic competition.
Yeah. So the thing is, I didn't give up on the other Olympics. What happened was in the world of transitions, I transitioned from a doubles canoe to a singles canoe, which is really different. And I came close, but I failed to make two Olympic teams in 96 and 2000. And but I was making the national team every year, and I was set to end my career with the World Championships in 2001, which were going to be in September of 2001 in the United States, on the Ocoee River, just a few miles from where I was living. And then the September 11th attacks happened, and those World Championships were canceled.
Right.
And that just seemed like not the right way to end the career. And so at that time, I started to uh, explore the idea of paddling the doubles canoe again, but this time with a different canoe partner. And most importantly, at a very different stage of my life. I mean, at this point, I had a family, I had a young daughter, I was, in my 30s, and life looked a lot different than it did back in 1992. And my doubles canoe partner for this go around was in the same situation. So instead of having the proverbial eggs all in one basket, this was a much more balanced approach, to the Olympics. And while it may not have led to success by the way others define success, like winning a gold medal, it was a really important experience just to kind of see what that looks like when you sort of diversify your experiences and your interests and what you learn along the way. And you also see different ways to contribute to your performative environment in your 30s than you did when you were in your 20s. So all of that was like played hugely into my 2004 Olympic journey.
Oh, that no, I mean, we admire your longevity as well because, as we say to everybody that comes through here, it's hard to sustain things at the top flight, and particularly, I imagine, in that Olympic world where funding isn't always at the highest level, the commitment and dedication you need to train for one Olympics, never mind to shoot for two. And I think one of the things that intrigues us there is you must have a very high level of resilience and work ethic, Joe, because there's a lot of disappointment there. You were talking about 4 yearly cycles. You're shooting for the Olympics, didn't quite get there, shooting again, didn't quite get there, and then still got that desire, that drive, that work ethic to say, I'm not done. I'm going to have another go at Athens.
It's really interesting. I mean, I always sort of examine the relationship with words like resilience and grit and kind of that keep goingness, right? But the other side of that for me, guys, is that I come from a sport that is also really enjoyable to do. I mean, I get to go out on a river, out in nature every day with people that I like and in just an incredible learning environment as well. So even though there is disappointment and um, there are other choices and options to make, I also had a lot of confidence that there was a lot to learn in this kind of environment and a lot to enjoy in this as well. But I do think it is worth pointing out that I think getting clear on the enjoyment side is really important, as I'm sure you guys may have experienced in your sports career. What often happens is that in your 30s, it's not that you're not capable of performing anymore. But what happens is, or like what happened with me was when I was in my early 20s, I remember like going to like trade shows to sign autographs and meet lots of people. And lots of these executives and mid-level managers would come up to me and say, "Oh, I would do anything to trade places with you and be back in my 20s and kind of act on this, on my goals and my desires and what I really wanted to do because I kind of passed all that up to sort of do the corporate thing." But that was not what it was like in my 30s. A lot of people were just like, "Hey, that was nice what you did in your 20s. Now it's time for you to grow up, get a job, and be responsible like the rest of us." And it's so those kind of cultural kind of model.
Societal pressures almost, isn't it, to
It's
conform?
exactly
Yeah.
like if you're going to compete into your 30s, it's not like that your body or experience is going to give up on you. Like you might be entering the best time of your life, but you do have to be very value centric and knowing why you want to do it and what you're hoping to get out of it, because there are going to be a lot of people. You're going to see a lot of your friends that are sort of putting down roots and kind of growing in new ways, making money, having children, buying a home, maybe doing things that you're not doing. But this is why I think that values alignment, if you're going to keep going into your 30s or even your 40s, is so important.
No, and again, you're pulling out some great pearls of wisdom here, Joe, because enjoyment first and foremost is so important. So many times we have athletes, and when we say, when you look back, are there any regrets? And whilst life takes us where it takes us, we shouldn't really have regrets. But we often hear, "I wish I'd enjoyed it more. I put myself under so much pressure that I failed to actually be present and truly enjoy that process." And I think that societal pressure is another element, because we always say the accelerator element of ATA is not about accelerating you to the end of your career. You want to compete for as long as you find it fulfills you. And that might be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We've had some people 20 plus years. And that societal pressure starts to make people think, well, I have to transition. Now's the time to get into industry. No, not necessarily. The acceleration for us is when you do make that decision, ideally on your terms, that you accelerate to the highest possible level as quickly as possible in the next chapter. So it's interesting that you mentioned that as well, because that pressure that exists, I think, almost globally, and certainly in Western culture of, well, you're in your early 30s, now you must be married with children and a house and a big mortgage, and that's you set. Well, no. And that's why it's interesting talking to you, because transition comes to all of us. We all have multiple chapters. Nobody, well, very rarely do you hit something out of college or straight out of sport and then do that forever. There's often different touch points along the way. So I think, yeah, you've pulled out a very important reference point there, Joe.
So, Joe, you just mentioned then a few things about the longevity within sport and how you have to ask yourselves the right questions about why are you competing? What are your values? What are your visions? Why are you wanting to stay in this world? And that's something James and I explore with current athletes about the preparation for life beyond the game. It's about identifying clarity on where is it you want to go. So in order to do that, we explore what are your values as an individual? What's your vision? Like, what are your ambitions and what are your passions? Just give us an insight into your mindset when you were in, like you mentioned, you're in your early 30s and you've got societal pressures about when are you going to get a real job? When are you going to get out of this game? You're getting a little bit older now. Just what were your values and your visions that kept you ploughing towards that goal of, I'm going to go to Athens 2024? Because like you mentioned, your plan was to retire in 2021, and then because of awful external factors, that never came to fruition, and you had to do another 3 years to get to that next cycle. Just sort of what drove you to get to that point? What were your key values?
You know, for me, I think there's a lot of like life chapters that flashing through my mind, and like how to answer that question, Carl. So, because like I think today at 55, it might be a little bit different, but I'm going to try to take you back to my 30s, and because life is different in our 30s. There's a lot of things we know and don't know, and I mean that's kind of what's coming up for me. I should tell you, my father, who passed away 5 years ago this week, he was an amazing champion for me, but not always. When I was really young, I remember like I was just 14, 15 years old. I came back from a race, but the race was far from Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised. And I got back in the middle of the night. It was like 3 in the morning. I had school the next day. Like my dad was not happy about these all-night drives that you had to do on a school day. And I remember him meeting me at the door and saying like, "That's it, you're done." And it's like, you're not doing this anymore. And yeah, like I just like I went to bed in tears, right? And later in my life, I would go to these family reunions. Like I had won the Olympic Games, like I had won a lot of world medals and things. And like I'd be like answering to like all these distant relatives and things like this. I come from like a big family of Jewish lawyers, and it's like, when are you going to stop goofing around? When are you going to do something real with your life? And so and of course, like my dad stepped up and like he was my biggest defender, like of that, and so that's what goes through my mind is that is that I think having being able to have conversations with your family that sort of evolve and reinforce these values, and they don't work out the same for everyone, right? Everyone is really different, but I do think that was an interesting journey with my father that also led to, I think, how I felt and sort of the lessons that I took away. And but it was funny, like all those societal pressures, like they were very kind of close to me, and I didn't know that I really had the skills or expected to sort of be bombarded with this. When are you going to grow up and get a real job? When are you going to stop goofing around and playing games? And
So
now, of
so
course,
that support network is key, isn't it, Joe? Your dad was that for you. Not everybody has it, but it's invaluable to have somebody that shares your vision, your passion, and is in your corner, for want of a better phrase, to support you on that journey.
there may be an athlete, watching us, listening to us right now that may or may not have that. And what I would say to them is like, look inside, find, really do that first, like why you want this, what really matters. Because with that, it does become easier to sort of build the external team and support system around you, the network of friends and advocates and supporters, and and not just of you, but how you can be of them also. Like, I mean, that's another things that, I mean, you guys know how sport can be this amazing endeavor, but it's also amazingly selfish as well. So I think when athletes can also find those ways to sort of channel some of their efforts into giving something back and being of service to people, that can also be immensely empowering in this journey of values as well.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's a message for all of us, whatever walk of life we're in, Joe. I think the benefit, if we could all embrace a mentor-mentee mindset, that we're all here, we can all have wisdom and insight that can help people coming on the path behind us. And equally, we should always be looking to learn and access the wisdom of those that have walked ahead. I think that sort of reciprocity, if we could all do that, the world would be a better place. But I think just moving into, because there's so many transitions that we're unpacking here, Joe, which is fabulous. So obviously, post-competition, looking at our research, you had that experience of going into that senior leadership, into that CEO environment for the US kayak and canoeing team. So obviously, there'll be a myriad of things we could talk about in there, but I suppose the thing that's at the top of our mind when we were thinking about that is the element of transferable skills, Joe. So one of our guests that we just released on the podcast today, Conrad Smith's an ex-international rugby union player. He won a couple of World Cups, very, very highly respected and recognised in that space. And he's now a lawyer. And he talked a lot about transferable skills and things that athletes are often not aware that they have. He focused heavily on communication, the ability to give and take feedback. So I know you've talked and alluded to the challenge, which I can only imagine, of going down an ever-changing, white water with a partner, trying to coordinate. But what transferable skills would you say you took from your sporting journey into that leadership journey and that space of becoming a CEO?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, James. So first of all, I would actually circle back to my relationship with my first doubles canoe partner with whom I won the gold medal, Scott Strausbaugh, and really how different we were from each other. So I think, not just working, really almost searching out for people that are really different than me, as colleagues, and building a team around that.
Yes.
And if the people were already inside of USA Canoe Kayak, then that was even better because I didn't have to go out and search for those kind of people. But I also just want to just say for a moment, like, I mean, look, I think on the surface, people might listen to this. Oh, Joe was a Olympic gold medalist. He raced as an athlete for USA Canoe Kayak for 19 years, and he went on to become the CEO. Believe me, there was never a less qualified person to become CEO. I had never worked like a paycheck job in my life. I wasn't especially like good at leading other people. What I always tell coaching clients on our intake call is that I always explain it was a 5-year run running USA Canoe Kayak. And the first 2 years was a disaster. Like I was really good at taking care of other people, but horrible at taking care of myself. And like I got irritable. I lost my way with my health. Back then, this was starting in 2009. By 2011, I weighed about 60 pounds more, like 25 kilograms more than I do today. And, I was really, really lost. And I think that I kept telling myself this story, and I think the athletes will really appreciate this. I had like this inner voice in my head that said, I knew that my life was like spiraling like the wrong way. Like I could see it, I could feel it, my energy level, I could look in the mirror and see how I looked. And I had this voice in my head that was like, oh, you're an Olympic champion. You know how to figure it out. You know how to get back on track. And then there's this other voice that's saying, well, then why aren't you doing it? Like, why aren't you doing something about it?
Yeah.
And so finally, again, I was working, USA Canoe Kayak was based in Oklahoma City at the Oklahoma City Boathouse Foundation, which is where the 2028 Olympic canoeing events are going to be when LA hosts the Olympic Games. And they had started an employee wellness program, in 2013, about halfway through my 5-year run at USA Canoe Kayak. And guys, like, it wasn't like I had a goal to lose weight. I just knew that I needed to break the momentum of some bad habits. And I just needed like the spiral to stop, So just putting on gym clothes in the middle of the day and playing games and playing sports with my friends, as opposed to going to the all-you-can-eat pizza buffet or the all-you-can-eat Chinese food buffet, that started to sort of turn the corner for me. And very, very slowly, I started to get my energy back. But as I started to feel better and started to do more things, I took up running. I eventually ran a marathon. But when I went to these social mixers, like that come along with the executive level sport, you go to these cocktail parties and these networking events, and instead of just saying like, oh, I'm the CEO of USA Canoe Kayak, what do you do? I would just like get something to drink and I'd walk over to someone, and after like a sentence or two, I'd be like, tell me about a time you were stuck and what did you do to get unstuck? And like an hour later, I would just be sitting there like, that is an incredible story. Tell me more. And, I think this openness to learning about others and thinking about the application of these sports skills to helping people do better in their lives, like that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. That's why we are having this conversation now, is that someone is going to hear this, and in ways they can't even fathom yet, they're going to take their sports skills that they're using today, and they are going to help people turn their lives around in ways they can't imagine tomorrow.
Well, you've given us the perfect segue, Joe, into where you are now. So I think there's, and again, I'm smiling, I'm nodding. Carl knows my passion. My other business, Joe, is The Lonely Leader. It's very much about individual leaders who have put themselves in that position of high pressure, isolation, and all the negative consequences to their health, energy, etc., which you are talking to perfectly. But interestingly, it sounds like even though you were wrestling with that, your mind, your spirit was being taken on a path towards, I'm enjoying helping people, how I communicate people, how I coach with people. So we're moving through to the next transitions. Obviously, that's, as you said, that was a 5-year run. Tell us a little bit about where that took you, what you're doing now, Joe, because I don't think anybody's surprised listening that there's a desire to help people and to coach and support people. So tell us a bit about what you do currently.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I actually think you set up a part 2 of this conversation about we should have a conversation about isolation.
Absolutely.
I think this is going to be something like, let's actually just do a small segue on it. If you are an athlete and you are thinking about a career that is going to last you the next 30 years of your life, and you are not thinking about ways to combat isolation in the world that we are shifting into right now, like that, that would be like going out to play in the championship game without a game plan.
Yeah.
So I actually, however you came up with that name, The Lonely Leader, it's brilliant. And like the best days of that name are still ahead of itself. And so that'll be a good conversation to have with you. I think for me, one of the things I mentioned to Carl earlier that I referred these different chapters of life and how you can answer questions differently at different stages. And I have no regrets about anything. Life has been really good to me. I've had a lot of fun. I've enjoyed a lot of things, but I will tell you that very quickly after winning the Olympics, almost like hours after winning the Olympics, like I think at 22 years old, like my brain was starting to think like, what's the right way to do this? Like, what are the right things to say? Who's the right person to be? Who are the right persons to be around? And I think you start to make these choices, these decisions based on this momentous opportunity that sits in front of you, which inherently isn't a bad decision. The problem is if you never check in on those choices you made when you were 22 years old and you just sort of let them play out, which I did for almost 30 years. And that led to some unhealthy things that had played out in my life. And I needed to make some changes in my life. And those were really important. And all this to say is that I've mentioned a couple of times I'm 55 years old. And I will just tell you guys, the last 5 years of my life have been the best 5 years of my life. And often people say, oh, like, what would you tell your 22-year-old self? Like, absolutely nothing. Because if I didn't have all of those experiences, maybe those last 5 years don't land for me the way they did. But relative to the question of what I'm doing now, why this became so curious to me and the age and the relevance of this is that I think around 50-ish, maybe in your 40s, maybe even in your late 30s, we're talking about this idea of midlife transitions. And often, specifically the transition of your first half of life to your second half of life. And I do want to address like two questions that James Hollis addresses in his book, The Second Half of Life, because I'm not asking any athlete to hurry these questions along, but I do think you'll finish your career in sport. And it's very natural for people to say, what does the world want from me? What does the world want from me? What am I supposed to do? What does my work look like? Who do my friends look like? Who does my life partner look like? You start to just answer these questions and then you build some momentum with that and you go down the line and then you get into your 40s, maybe 50. And that question changes a little bit. The second question becomes, what does my life want from me? Not what does the world want from me? What does my life want from me? And that's why, Carl, like that question you asked me could look so different about how I see my 30s today at 55 versus like putting myself in my 30s and answering that question as I did. And I think to understand that there's a journey, and of course, we're all going to walk through that journey alone, but I love in my coaching practice this idea of midlife transitions. They're very real. I think there's support around them. I think there's ways to do them well. I think you can do like me and you can ignore them for 30 years. And, that comes with a price tag also, and at the root of all this, sport does ask a lot of our ego. It asks us to step up. And at some point, we have to sort of reckon with what has been suppressed as we've brought our ego up. What do we want to do with that? What do we want to do about that? How do we find that meaning? And what does health and happiness and wellness and thriving kind of look like into our 50s, our 60s, our 70s, our 80s? And I love this moment. Like, I think that's what the journey of becoming is all about and starts to look like, and how we can really make that better.
And I think it's really powerful because of where you are and the transitions you've gone through, Joe. It reinforces what we talk a lot about, the need for clarity. And you've talked about a series of questions. And I think that's a great illustration that we've got to be asking ourselves the right questions. And we spend a lot of time coaching existing athletes or recently transitioned. And what you're showing is it doesn't matter where you are on the journey, the challenge is to keep asking the questions, to keep refining the clarity, to keep defining what success is. You've nudged into that executive world and you've come out of that and gone into the coaching space, which is yet another real life example that we talk about, that it's absolutely fine to try things, to have a chapter in one area and say, this doesn't serve me as well as as I thought it might. My energy, my lifestyle, things need to change. So you've demonstrated that perfectly. You've competed, you've gone into that executive world, you've gone into the coaching space, and you're still asking yourself questions and you're still finding the right answers, which, just like all of us, I think it's powerful to hear that. Very few of us have got the perfect strategy buttoned up. We developed it in our 20s and it just soars through to the end of life. I think we get challenged, we get adversity, we get doors closing, doors opening, and being comfortable to say, nobody's got it all figured out. We've just got to keep asking the right questions, keep refining that clarity, and keep developing the actions to move forward. So I think you've given us a fabulous perspective. I've got to ask though, because within transition, obviously you mentioned earlier on, you grew up in Washington, you competed for the US, and you operated as the CEO, and you touched on very briefly earlier, but you now live, am I right in saying, Carl mentioned this, almost on top of the very venue that you won your gold medal at, which I think is a pretty cool little story, and a great way to keep that memory fresh. You're literally still in the venue, which is wonderful.
I know we're doing this on video. I'm just going to actually walk you outside onto my balcony and
Perfect.
show you where I live. That is the 1992 Olympic whitewater course. The Spanish athletes are out there training right now. They're
Wonderful.
their Olympic dream for 2028 in the United States, in which the Olympics are in Los Angeles, but the whitewater canoeing events will be in Oklahoma. But yeah, coming back here and living here, it wasn't about like, I don't go down to the river and sit there and rehash my Olympic dream.
No.
James, like you, I mean, I'm living in a new country with a new culture and a new language. And like every day I wake up and my brain has to learn something new. Like I don't speak Spanish, but I do speak Catalan, which is, what we speak up here in
Yes.
Catalonia. And it is like, if I want to get a haircut, my teeth cleaned, my oil changed, like I don't get to do that in English. Like I got to figure it out. Like my brain is just actively working and staying curious and doing something new. And this environment it's great to be here. Like there's been a sense of peacemaking that has happened since I've lived here, but it's not about like trying to reconnect with anything. In fact, I'd say it's more the opposite, is like these other mountains behind me where I go running several days each week. That is sort of my new kind of stomping ground for sort of learning new lessons and figuring out like where the next challenges lie and where to be curious, and how to ask myself more questions that are going to help give me more direction in that next step of life.
No, and I think it's a wonderful answer, Joe. And I just having a bit of fun with you. We knew full well you weren't sitting down there still in your team gear, reliving the sort of 1992 glory days. But the reason why it's important is having the courage and the confidence to step into those uncomfortable environments. You've moved to, as you say, a whole new country, new culture, challenging yourself to keep learning, challenge yourself to keep asking those questions. So you're a living embodiment of what you're coaching and the very definition of transition. So many of us get trapped in our comfort zone. We're fearful of that discomfort, so we stay where we are. And that doesn't necessarily lead to fulfillment. And again, going back to the episode that we released today, talking with Conrad Smith, he mentioned a bugbear of his of people just step out of sport and stay in the coaching space. They stay in the sport coaching space because they think that's all they can do. And he was encouraging people to look beyond that, look at the wider world and the opportunities it presents. And I love your story and how you've gone through these different steps and the fact that you're in a whole different country. So I think we could talk to you for hours, Joe, but in the interest of sort of staying within the sort of usual window that we have for the podcast, one final question. It's been fascinating talking to you, and I'm sure lots of people will be interested to learn more about your story. We've mentioned your book Slalom. So if people wanted to connect with you, Joe, and continue this conversation, where's the best place to find you? Where would they be the best place to connect?
Well, I'm active on LinkedIn, and you can, of course, go to my website, joejacobi.com, joejacobi.com. And also, every week I write a little essay called Thinking in Waves, which is about my latest love and endeavor, something that I do down in your neck of the woods. I paddle a surf ski, which is a specially made kayak for surfing offshore ocean waves. And my coach is down in Tarifa, not far from Malaga, wind sports haven down there. But yeah, I take the idea of surfing waves on a surf ski kayak and transfer those ideas to an innovative model for clear and creative thinking. And these are short essays that I write. People seem to love them. I love writing them. And that's also a great way to stay in touch.
Fabulous. Well, we'll make sure we put the links in the show notes, Joe. And all that remains to be said, this won't be the last time we talk, I'm sure, but we're massively grateful for your time, your insights, and the wisdom that you've shared with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for the great work you guys are doing.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.